The Sweeper is a classic ghost story written by A.M. Burridge. It's about an old woman who lives in fear of autumn and the dead leaves falling from the trees. Tessa Wynyard thought that it was strange that Miss Ludgate was kind to beggars, for there was a thin streak of stinginess in her. Miss Ludgate was rich enough not to care what others thought, but she was old enough to be crotchety. Miss Ludgate gave little to local charities, yet she was very generous in her charity to individuals. Her neighbors were not grateful to her for this. They said that she encouraged every strange character who passed that way. Tessa Wynyard first agreed to work as a companion for Miss Ludgate on a month's trial. She knew that Miss Ludgate would be difficult. She did not know whether she would be able to keep her job or if she would want to keep it. Tessa had found the job because she knew a niece of the old lady. The niece was able to give Tessa hints about her aunt's behavior. When Tessa entered the house for the first time, she fell under the spell of it. She loved old country mansions. The house was called Billingdon Abbots. It was very old. The gardens around the house had many trees. They gave the house an air of melancholy. At first, the interior of the house filled Tessa with awe. She loved pretty things, but she was afraid of furniture and pictures that were so coldly beautiful. Tessa spent most of her time with Miss Ludgate in the drawing room. There were homelier looms that held photographs of living people, but Miss Ludgate preferred to sit in the drawing room near the cabinet of priceless china. It was as if she realized that she was only the guardian of her treasures. She wanted to have them within sight now that her term of guardianship was drawing to a close. Miss Ludgate must be over 80, Tessa thought. She was very small and frail. Winter and summer she wore a white shawl inside the house. In summer she wore a lighter weight shawl. It matched her hair in color. Her eyes were blue and piercing. Her once beautiful mouth looked grim. She always spoke very slowly. Since she knew that she had only to be understood to be obeyed, she made sure that she was understood. Tessa spent her first week with Miss Ludgate without knowing whether or not she liked the old lady. She had no idea how Miss Ludgate felt about her. Tessa did what she was told and thought before she spoke, but she wondered what place she was to fill. The truth is that Miss Ludgate wanted to wee somebody young around the house. The servants were old family servants. They remained faithful to her because of rumors of legacies. She was lonely and starved for companionship. Tessa was able to play the piano well. So was Miss Ludgate, until her fingers stiffened with rheumatism. Now the piano was no longer silent. Miss Ludgate regained an old lost pleasure. Tessa was 22. She was not a beauty. Her good looks were the result of perfect health and her youth. When Tessa had been with Miss Ludgate a week, the old lady called her Tessa for the first time. She added, "I hope you intend to stay with me, my dear. It will be dull for you and you may find me a bother. But I will not take up all your time. I think that you will be able to find friends and amusements." So Tessa stayed on beyond the first month. A friendship existed between the two women. At times, they were able to touch hands over the barrier between youth and age. Tessa felt tenderness toward Miss Ludgate. She reminded Tessa of a poor actress who played the part of a queen. She wore cheap crown jewels and gave commands which other actors obeyed. The realities of life, wet streets, poor meals, and cold rooms, waited for her when the curtain fell. Tessa was filled with pity when she thought how short a time Miss Ludgate had to live. She wondered how it must feel to think every evening of a tomorrow that might not be. Tessa would have found life dull except for the complete change in her surroundings. She was the daughter of a country minister, one of 7 brothers and sisters. They had worn one another's clothes, worn out carpets, and mishandled furniture. They had broken everything but their parents' hearts. The grandeur of living with Miss Ludgate broke the monotony for Tessa. She wrote a letter home to her mother. This house might have come out of a book in which there is a mystery. There is no mystery that I have heard of, but at least it ought to have a ghost. I don't like to ask Miss Ludgate. She might believe in ghosts, and it might scare her to talk about them. Or she might not. Then she would be furious with me for talking about them. But we are certainly haunted by tramps. Her letter went on to describe the daily visits of those who beg and steal on their way from workhouse to workhouse. 3 or 4 of them showed up each day. None went away empty-handed. Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper, had orders, and she carried them out. When there was no spare food, she gave them money. Tessa was always meeting these vagrants on the path. She grew used to them. They knew she only worked there and could be fired, but they knew that they were always welcome guests. Tessa resented their presence. She secretly raged against Miss Ludgate for encouraging them. The girl knew about the struggles of the decent poor. Her upbringing had taught her about the poverty of farmhands and laborers. On Miss Ludgate's estate, some families lived on bread and potatoes. Yet the old lady had no sympathy for them and gave everything to beggars. Tessa could not speak to Miss Ludgate about the subject. If she did, she might lose her job. But she did mention it to Mrs. Finch. At first, Mrs. Finch said only one word: orders. After a moment, she added, Miss Ludgate has her own good reasons for doing this, or thinks she has. It was late summer when Tessa first moved to the estate. She looked at the trees from her window every morning, and she watched the progress of the year. The yellow leaves began to give way to gold and brown and red. One evening, Miss Ludgate appeared in her winter shawl. She seemed depressed. As she sat at the table, she leaned on her elbows and rested her face between her hands. "Are you well, Miss Ludgate?" Tessa asked. "My bad time of the year is approaching," the old woman replied. "If I can live until the end of November, I will last another year. But I don't know yet." "Of course you're not going to die this year," Tessa said in a voice that would soothe a child. "If I don't die this autumn, it will be the next." The old voice quavered. "It will be in the autumn that I will die." "I know that. But how can you know?" Tessa asked gently. "It does not matter how I know." "Have many leaves fallen yet?" "Hardly any," said Tessa. "There has been very little wind." "They will fall very soon now," said Miss Ludgate. 2 days later it rained heavily. The wind sprang up. Showers of yellow leaves fell to earth. Miss Ludgate sat watching them. During dinner, the wind and the rain stopped. Tessa peeped between the blinds. It looked as though it was going to be a fine night. Miss Ludgate got out a deck of cards. Tessa picked up a book. There was silence except for the sound of the cards being placed on the polished table. Tessa could not have said when she first heard it, but gradually she had become aware of sounds in the garden outside. Finally, she was forced to wonder what caused them. She could not guess how long they had been going on. Tessa closed the book and listened. The sounds were crisp, dry, and drawn out. There was a pause after each one. What was it? Then Tessa knew. On the long path behind the building, somebody was sweeping up leaves with a broom. But what a time to sweep up leaves! She continued to listen. She was sure that was the sound, but she could not imagine any gardener working at this hour. She looked at Miss Ludgate, but she said nothing. Miss Ludgate sat listening. Her face was half turned toward the window. It was dreadful to see someone who was so old be so tense.